أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us recognize the truth and help us follow it, and to help us recognize the falsehood and help us avoid it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the best of our deeds the last ones that we do, and the best of our days the day that we shall meet Him. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we'll talk about one main event actually in the Khilafah of Omar alayhi ridwanillah, and that is the battle of Al-Qadisiyah. You know, whenever normally the decisive battle against the Roman being actually the battle of Al-Yarmouk, the really decisive battle against the Persian Empire was the battle of Al-Qadisiyah. Even though it did not finish everything, but anyway it was the main decisive battle. And the events leading to the Qadisiyah basically started way before the battle itself. It started even during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq alayhi ridwanillah. Now a few events that happened before that, what happened is that the Persians, of course, they were ruled by the Sasanic family for over 3,000 years. And what happened because of internal problems, all the sons of Kisra, the king of Persia, were killed, were assassinated, just to ensure that there's no basically heir to the throne, except one young son whose name was Yazdajard, whose mother basically took him and she hid him somewhere. And he was basically raised as a normal child. And also a daughter named Buran. And with the death of Kisra and with the absence of any basically heir to the throne, then Buran was the one that was leading the Persian Empire, the daughter of Kisra. But then eventually Yazdajard was discovered. So they brought him basically to rule, and everybody basically pledged support and loyalty to him. But he was still basically a very young man, unfit to rule. And he took as his right-wing aide Rustum. Rustum, basically he was his right hand in his ruling. And Rustum himself was not an aggressive person to start with, so he had a lot of hesitation. So anyway, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq alayhi ridwanillah had already sent Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha and Khalid ibn al-Walid to certain parts of Iraq to conquer that part. And he had 12,000 soldiers at the end, or at least, shortly before the battle of Al-Yarmouk. And then, meanwhile, the battle of Al-Yarmouk actually started in Bilad al-Sham. This is shortly before the death of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq alayhi ridwanillah. And as we discussed, then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent the command to Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha to send Khalid ibn al-Walid alayhi ridwanillah along with half of the army all the way to Bilad al-Sham for Al-Yarmouk. And we also discussed how Khalid ibn al-Walid was able to cross the desert in 5 days with all the big huge army that he had. And Khalid ibn al-Walid alayhi ridwanillah had taken 6,000 soldiers, included in those were half of the Sahaba that were in the army. So he did not leave all the Sahaba, he did not take all of them, but half of them left with him, and the other half actually basically stayed in with Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha and Al-Iraq. And then during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq alayhi ridwanillah, what happened is that the attack on the Muslims started basically. And Yazdajard, after consulting with his aides, were planning an all attack on the Muslims. So they started preparing a huge army to attack the Muslims at once. And this was already now into the Khilafah of Omar ibn Khattab alayhi ridwanillah. That's when Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha alayhi ridwanillah sent to Omar asking him for support. That we need support. Basically the Persian Empire is preparing a huge army to kill all of us. So we need support to face them. And Omar alayhi ridwanillah then started calling among all the Arabs that were actually Muslims that we need the support to go give support to Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha. And just to encourage them, he said that he himself, Omar ibn Khattab, will be leading the army. And he called anyone that has any talent or afford any skills in fighting to come and join him. Whether he's a poet, whether he's a khatib, whether he's a soldier, anyone that can have any help, can provide any help, was to join him. And he camped on the outskirts of Medina waiting for the forces to join him. But then Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu suggested to him that you should not go out. You have to stay behind. Should anything happen to you, the Muslims will not have any leader. So you have to stay, and that's a suggestion that they gave Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, if you remember. So Ali ibn Abi Talib suggested to Umar that you have to stay behind so as for you to be the base for any Muslim to go back to. And Umar alayhi ridwanullah accepted that, but he was looking then for a leader that is fit to lead that huge army or that huge battle. So he kept on thinking as to who that person was. Meanwhile, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah was bringing the zakat money from Yemen. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah, of course, is one of the greatest Sahaba, and he was the uncle of the Prophet, the maternal uncle of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, from his mother's side. And then as he came and brought basically all the money, then Abdul Rahman ibn Auf immediately thought of him. So he told Umar ibn Khattab alayhi ridwanullah, Ya Amir al-Mu'min, I found him, the person that we were looking for. And Umar said, who would that be? And then Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, he said, Al-Asadu Adiyan, that the fierce lion. And he said, who do you mean? And he says, Al-Asadu fi barathinih, that the lion with all his glory, with all his might and strength. Who would that be? And he told them, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah. And he told them, that is the one. That's when Sa'd was chosen basically to lead that huge army. And immediately they sent for support in Yemen, and the people of Yemen then immediately pledged support, and they told him that the support is coming shortly. And they started sending basically thousands of soldiers until eventually, he says, initially he had 4,000. Sa'd ibn Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah. Then those were joined by 2,000 from Yemen, 2,000 from Najd, and with those that were of Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha, until eventually before he left, he had 12,000 with him. So Sa'd ibn Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah had 12,000. But he did not want to march with 12,000 because the need basically of the 12,000 would be difficult to meet, especially water. I mean, if they were to stop at any village on the way, they would deplete the water, 12,000. So he basically divided into different groups and sent them one after the other. He sent Zahra ibn al-Huwayyi alayhi ridwanullah in the front, and with him were 2,000 knights basically. So he was the one that moves ahead of the army. With al-Muthanna was already how many? How many al-Muthanna had with him? What? No, 6. Right? 6,000. Reverse it. 6,000. And we have here 12. And the numbers basically kept on basically joining him until basically before the battle they were 36,000. 36,000. So the number is still actually increasing. So Zahra ibn al-Huwayyi alayhi ridwanullah, then he moved basically toward the land of Al-Qadisiyah, where basically the Persians were expected to meet the Muslims. And as he was moving, he reached a certain fortress named Qudais. A fortress, and they thought that that fortress basically would be filled with people. And they looked from a distance, and they kept on seeing one person coming from here, one person coming from there inside the fortress. So they thought that it was full of warriors. Then they basically form a certain battalion, and they attack. And to their surprise, when they entered, they found the whole thing deserted. There was nothing and no one in there except one person, doing all of these things to give the impression basically that there's someone in there. Then Zahra ibn al-Huwayyi alayhi ridwanullah, immediately, he was a person of the Persian person, that we have to catch him before he reaches the Persian. They did not want him to reach the Persian and warn them off the army that was coming actually their way. And some of the Muslims could not catch up with him until Zahra himself decided to go after him. And he did not catch up with him until he reached Al-Qadisiyah itself, the land of Al-Qadisiyah. That's when he was able to catch him, and he killed him as well. And as the army was moving, of course, you know, the provision became, or the shortage of provision became a serious concern. So they reached a certain place, and that place close to the Qadisiyah was known as Ardus Sawad. It was a land that was mostly inhabited by Christian Arabs, but who were loyal to the Persian Empire. So those Christian Arabs had a lot of cattle, a lot of cows. So they decided basically to hide them in one of the nearby valleys. So when the Muslims came asking for any food, then they said, we don't have any animals, But of course, the Muslim looked around and there was a lot of grazing land in there. So you cannot have all that grazing land without having any animals. But they said, we did not have anything. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for one of the bulls, to make a loud noise. I don't know what it's called in English, in Arabic, al-khuwar. What is it called in English, the noise of that the cows make? Moo, just like that. Moo. Well, he mooed very loudly. Moo. I think there might be another word, probably. Maybe moo. Maybe it is. Moo and meow, So he said that he mooed very loudly, that the Muslims heard, and they went to where the mooing was coming from, and they found a huge herd of cattle. And with that, they were able basically to have provision for many, many days to come. Meanwhile, again, then the Muslims kept on marching toward Al-Qadisiyah. Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha alayhi ridwanullah died before Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas reached there. But he told Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas that under no situation, under no circumstances, should you be closing or crossing the bridge, crossing the river. That you should not cross the river under any circumstance. Why? Because of a battle that happened shortly before that, which is the battle of Al-Jisr. What happened, there was one of the Sahaba, Abu Ubaid al-Thaqafi alayhi ridwanullah. He was basically meeting the army of the Persians. And those were separated by a river, a big river, over which there was a bridge, a very narrow bridge. The Persians told the Muslims that cross the bridge to meet us and you'll have basically safety until you cross the bridge. But as they were crossing, then that's when the Persian basically ordered the attack. Subhanallah, khiyana. And with that, of course, the Muslims could not go back. So it was a big chaos. Some of them actually going in, and some of them trying to go back. They said 4,000 Muslims were drowned in that instance. 4,000. And the whole thing was saved by having some of the Muslims basically carrying the bridge on their own back. One of them was Abu Ubaid al-Thaqafi himself, until all the Muslims and their horses were able to cross back. So here Al-Muthanna ibn Haritha told him that you should never cross the bridge. Remember what happened to the Muslims. So anyway, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah, was crossing or marching toward Al-Qadisiyah. Again, Yazdajard had appointed as a general leader of the army Rustum. And Rustum was hesitant, but he pushed him until he agreed basically to lead the army. So here comes basically Rustum moving basically toward the land of Al-Qadisiyah. And then Rustum basically, just to impress the Muslims, he decided to bring, and Yazdajard was there with him, but Yazdajard he did not go into the battle. He decided to bring a lot of his jewelry and all of his might, anyway, to intimidate and impress the Muslims, because they told him that the Muslims are just a bunch of Arabs basically that are poor, that are used to eating nothing. So he thought that by doing that he would impress them and can buy them off with a little bit of money. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah then sent a group to meet them, and in that group he sent Nu'man ibn Muqrin, who was supposed to be their leader, and he sent some of the other Muslims. One of them was Ubadah ibn Sabit. They said he was over 7 feet tall. So anyway, again, to impress them. And again, the Yazdajard laid down all his might and glory. They said that he had a crown that used to weigh, close to 200 pounds. But he wouldn't put it on his head, that crown would be basically dangling down from chains, and he would just go and then sit behind it. Anyway, as to impress the people. And they said that he brought a huge carpet with a lot of jewelry, a lot of things, again, trying to impress and intimidate the Muslims. And the Muslims entered and were not basically impressed by any of that, it's not what they thought. And Yazdajard told them that we know that you're poor people, used to eat this and something very, I'll give you a little bit of money and you can go back home. And then Nu'man ibn Muqrin, he told him that I give you 3 options. And this, by the way, this is during war. So this is not, by the way, the rule of dealing with the non-Muslims. This is in time of wars. That's really, keep that in mind. So he told them, we give you 3 options. Instead of saying that basically that, yes, the money and all of that, look at the 3 options. He said the first one is to become Muslim. He said no. He said the second one is that you will pay al-jizya وأنتم صاغرون. You know the verse in the Quran, عن يد وأنتم, you know that basically you'll pay al-jizya وأنتم صاغرون. So Yazdajar, he says, what is صاغرون? What do you mean pay jizya? You pay that form of tax when you are صاغرين. You know, what does that mean? And Nu'man told him, that means you have to bring me the tax and you have to beg me to accept it, and I will tell you no, and you have to say, please take my tax money. And I will say no. In a way, with humiliation. What is the third option? He said war. And he said, I didn't think anyone basically will face us with war. So they sent them back, and nothing basically had happened. Meanwhile, again, the army of the Muslims kept on growing larger and larger until it reached 300 or 36,000. The army of the Persians were 120,000. And with 120,000, there were another 120,000, you know, servants and people that are basically do the manual work. So overall, it's 240,000. 240,000 meeting 36,000. And again, Rustum, basically, he was in the beginning, he was in the center of the army, and he appointed some of his leaders. One of them is Al-Jalinus, some famous names, Al-Jalinus, Al-Hirmuzan, and then Bahman. And with them, they had a very sophisticated weapon that the Arabs have not experienced before. What is that? Elephants. They had elephants. I mean, the Arabs have not experienced, you know, fighting with elephants before. And they had some narrations that they said that they had 70. Some of them, they said they have like 30 elephants. So they had many elephants, again, marching toward Al-Qadisiyah. And Sa'd ibn Waqqas was already actually in Al-Qadisiyah, and basically he kept on waiting for them for about 6 months. He reached there in Sha'ban, of the 14th of Sha'ban, and he stayed in there until the 15th of Safar. By that time, Al-Yarmouk was already finished. It was a unanimous victory, you know, against the Romans. And then Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah sent to Omar asking him for more support. You know, we're meeting a huge army. We need more support. At which time, of course, the one leading the army of the Muslims in Al-Yarmouk was whom? Who was leading the army of Al-Yarmouk? No, initially it was Khalid. But after Omar became the Khalifa, he changed that. Who was that? Abu Ubaidah Amr ibn al-Jarrah. Abu Ubaidah Amr ibn al-Jarrah, he kept Khalid with himself. He wanted Khalid with him. He needed him. You know, so he sent basically an army. He sent 6,000 under the leadership of Hashim ibn Utbah. And in them, some of the biggest heroes of the Muslims, one of them is Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi, the great Al-Qa'qa' alayhi ridwanullah. So they marched toward the land of Al-Qadisiyah. Meanwhile, again, Sa'd ibn Waqqas kept on acquiring more and more information, and more people were joining him. And the funny thing, it says one of them was Salah ibn Khuwaylid al-Uzdi, who was someone who claimed to be a prophet, actually, after the death of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. But then he became Muslim again. And he was able to attack a group, actually, of the Persians. And some of the Muslims thought that, well, he's already a murtad again. And he says that, no, by Allah, I will not go back after Allah opened my heart to Islam. And he was really a fierce warrior. Now, Umar ibn Khattab, alayhi ridwanullah, before he sent Sa'd ibn Waqqas, he gave him an important advice. First of all, he told him that make sure you remain connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Make sure that taqwa is always there in your heart. And he says, because you beat your enemy, you defeat your enemy with the taqwa, with your iman. That's what actually leads you to defeat the enemies. And he said, if you're equal to them in disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the victory will be given to the one who has more weapons, and that's not you. I mean, they have more weapons that you do. They have more weapons, they have more numbers. So if the only consideration is the weapons, they will defeat you. The only edge that you will have over them is your iman. This way you'll have the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he told Sa'd ibn Waqqas, you do not appoint as a leader anyone who became a murtad. After the death of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, some of the Muslims became murtad. They apostatized. Remember? We discussed that. And most of them came back to Islam. He said, none of these people should be appointed a position of leadership. So anyway, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah, then he prepared the army for the battle. But Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, on the first day, he had a sickness. a certain sickness that spread on his skin. He could not sit. Something that spread over his skin, so he could not, so he was watching basically the battle and leading it from a distance. He could not ride his horse, he could not walk, something that spread through his body and his legs. And he appointed as the one in charge as Khalid ibn Urtufa. And he was the one basically to lead, the local battle. But the overall guide was himself. And the first day of the battle called the day of Armath. The day of Armath. And Sa'd ibn Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah, he said basically that there will be 4 takbiras. And he said that, before that, the Muslims were basically in the land of Al-Qadisiyah, and Al-Qadisiyah was in front of them. And they had the river and a narrow bridge, and behind that were actually the Persians. So here, before the battle started, then they sent to Sa'd ibn Waqqas that basically you have to send us someone to negotiate. We need someone to negotiate with. So here, Sa'd ibn Waqqas wanted to send the same delegation, the same group that he had sent earlier to Yazdajard. Anyway, a group of people, to go basically meet with Rustum. He's the one in charge of the army, and discuss with them. Then Rab'i ibn Amir alayhi ridwanullah told him that don't send them a group. They'll think that you're giving them too much attention, too much regard. Send only one person. This way they'll feel that you're not taking them too seriously. Then Sa'd ibn Waqqas said that you'll be the one. I'll be sending you. Rab'i ibn Amir, who was Rab'i ibn Amir? Rab'i ibn Amir was a Bedouin. And he used to ride a donkey. Not that, anyway, to them, to the Persian, not something respectable. So he's someone that had 2 braids, long braids, patched up clothing, and riding a donkey, going, to meet with whom, to negotiate with whom? With Rustum, who was practically the leader, the king of that big force. And Rab'i ibn Amir went there, and they said, of course, Rustum had his huge tent prepared, and whenever people would go in to meet, basically Rustum, they would bow down. They would bow down. But they told him that the Muslims do not bow down to anybody. So don't expect him to do that. So they came up with a trick. They said, what we will do, we will lower the gate or the entrance to the tent. So we lower the tent, to the entrance to the tent, the curtain or something. So whenever he wants to come in, he would be forced to bend or to bow down. Rab'i ibn Amir alayhi ridwanullah, they said that he took his donkey all the way into the tent. Inside the tent, he tied it with one of the poles inside the tent, and as he was entering, he saw that curtain coming down. So he thought about it. So instead of going in like this, he entered backward. So he bent the other way around, entering with his behind, alayhi ridwanullah. And he was capable, subhanAllah, not to be intimidated by anybody. So he thought that, this is just a little bit Bedouin, somebody. Look at him. He can easily be intimidated, can easily be, impressed or anything. But Rab'i ibn Amir entered, and Rustum used to be sitting on a big throne. He says almost like a bed or a big couch. So Rab'i ibn Amir entered, and he kept on going in until he went in, and he sat next to the king on that big bed. So the soldiers of Rustum, they pushed him. Hey, what are you doing sitting on that bed with the king? And he told them, Wallah, you're evil people. We don't have differences in Islam. We used to sit with our own Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, like he was one of us. That's how he was. That's how the Prophet Muhammad, alayhi salatu wasalam, was. So he entered and he sat next to him. Again, he was trying to intimidate him or to buy him off. And Rab'i ibn Amir told him that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us for a reason. So he asked him, why did you come here? What are you coming here for? And he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent us to lead people out of the injustice of the man-made religions into the justice of Islam. Allah sent us to lead people from worshipping one another or to worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah sent us to lead people out of the tightness of this life into the vastness of the hereafter. This is what Rab'i ibn Amir alayhi ridwanullah said. This is what the Bedouin with the 2 braids said. I mean, nobody can put it in a better way than the way he said it. Nobody can say it in a better way. He says, مِنْ ضِيقِ الدُّنْيَا إِلَى سَاعَةِ الْآخِرَةِ, from the tightness of this world into the vastness of the hereafter. And he told him, then what do you ask for? And he says, I offer you 3 things, the same 3 things. Either you become Muslim, or you pay al-jizya wa antum saghirun, the same thing, the same expression. Or the third one, he said, this third one is war. And he said, well, let us think about it. So Rabi'i ibn Amir said, I give you 3 days. So he told them, you can control the army for 3 days. In other words, you have that control. You can delay the battle for 3 days. And he said, yes, we are all equal. He was sent to represent. And then the next day he says, well, let us think about it. So the next day, again, they asked for another person basically to come. And Rabi'i ibn Amir wanted to go himself back again. Then Sa'd ibn Waqqas said, no, I will send somebody else. So he sent Hudayfa ibn al-Muhsin. So the same thing he asked him. So Rustam told him, give us some time. And Hudayfa ibn al-Muhsin told him that you had 3 days. 1 day has passed already. So you have 2 days left. And the third day, they sent another one, Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah, alayhi ridwanullah. And the same thing, he said that 2 days have already passed. You have 1 day left. And subhanAllah, all of them came with the same words. Not wallahi talking against each other's, the same word. This is unity. Alayhim ridwanullah. And again, like I said, you had the Muslims basically overseeing the land of Al-Qadisiyah. So they had the control. And you had the river, and behind that, they were the Persians. So the Persians asked, why don't you cross? Then Sa'd ibn Waqqas said, no, you cross. So the Persians said, well, we're afraid that you might basically attack us while we're crossing. And Sa'd told them that if you know us, we never stab in the back. The Muslims will never do that. You did that in the Battle of Al-Jisr. We would not do that ourselves. And true enough, he allowed them all to cross before anything happened. And the first day, like I said, is the day of Armath. And Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah, he said that there will be 4 takbiras. And the first takbirah, each person will get ready. And the second takbirah, you'll check everything basically, you get ready for a duel or anything. The third takbirah, that's when the duel will happen. And the fourth takbirah, that's when everything actually starts. SubhanAllah, the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always there, remains in there. And that's exactly what happened. After the first takbirah, then he sent the khatibs and the poets to motivate people. Basically to get them motivated so they can be ready for the battle. And the morale started basically rising. And the second takbirah, then basically he said that you get your horses ready and do not be distracted by anything. At which time there's something interesting. He says, Amr ibn Adi ibn Karib, alayhi ridwanullah, he was basically speaking to the people to encourage them. Then one of the Persians threw an arrow and it fell into a pouch of his own arrows. So he got very mad at that. So he said that he went after him, after that Persian. And that Persian, when he saw him, he started running toward his own army. Then Amr was following him into the army of the Persians. Through the army of the Persian, he was able to capture him, put him on his horse, and go back. And he took him all the way back actually to the Muslims. The third takbirah, then the duel actually started happening. Some of the Muslims happening. And in the fourth takbirah, that's when the whole battle happened. Now something interesting happened in here. One of the Sahaba, his name is Abu Muhjim al-Thaqafi. His famous story. I mentioned it before in here. Some of you, I don't know if anybody remembers that. But this Abu Muhjim alayhi ridwanullah was an alcoholic. Yani he used to drink a lot. And he would repent and he would go back to drinking. And on that day, he got drunk. Or before the beginning of the battle, he got drunk. So Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah, to punish him, he imprisoned him. And he told him that you will not participate with us. That was your punishment. You will not get to fight with us. So he put him somewhere, and the one that was guarding him was the wife of Sa'd herself, Salma. And the battle started. And of course, Sa'd ibn Waqqas could not fight, like I said, because of what was happening in his skin. Then Abu Muhjim was watching from a distance, and he said, well, I could make a difference. I can contribute. But he was in prison. So he started begging his guard, Salma, alayhi ridwanullah, asking her that, why don't you let me go out and fight? Give me the horse of your husband, since he's sick. I'll cover myself up. Nobody will know who I was. I'll go and fight. And he said to her that if I die, I die. If I don't die, wallahi, I'll come back. She said no. And he insisted until eventually she gave in. So she gave him, he covered himself up, and she gave him the horse of her own husband. Meanwhile, Sa'd ibn Waqqas was watching the battle progressing, and he spotted him. He says, this man fights like Abu Muhsin. He has a unique way of fighting. And that horse looks like mine. But of course it cannot be. He's in prison. My horse is supposed to be back. And at the end of the day, then as he promised, he came back. Abu Muhsin alayhi ridwanullah. He came back. And then Sa'd went to his wife and he said, a strange thing happened today. I saw a man fighting like Abu Muhsin. He looks just like him. And the horse that looks like mine. She told him, that was him. And that was your horse. They said that Sa'd alayhi ridwanullah was so impressed by the fighting of Abu Muhsin that he went to him and he said, Wallahi, I will not imprison you anymore. Abu Muhsin said, Wallahi, I will not drink anymore. And they said this was the end of it. He didn't drink. He didn't go back to drinking afterward. SubhanAllah, a moment of sincerity, built on that. Sometimes we all go through like that, through certain moments where we have this clarity, this motivation. Don't just let it pass, but build on it. That's what he did. He built on that and he did not go back to drinking. What happened during that day, the day of Armath? Of course, like I said, Khalid ibn Urtufa was leading the battle in there. And the Muslims, for the first time, basically, they met this mighty weapon, which is the elephants. And the elephants, basically, the attack of the elephants were intensifying against the tribe of Bujayla. Why Bujayla? Because Bujayla were mighty warriors. So Rustam basically was directing the elephants toward that Bujayla so as to kill them. And then many of them basically actually were killed because of that. That's when Sa'd ibn Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah, then he said, help Bujayla. And that's when the Muslims basically tried to defend them. And some of the Muslims managed to get close to the elephants, and they cut the belts and all the harnesses basically that is connecting the person on the top, because each elephant had some kind of a box on the top in which there was a person who was guiding the elephant. So with that, they were able to break all of these basically carrying boxes, and the elephants basically were pacified. And that day ended, or the fighting continued until actually the night of that day after even Ghurub. And the Muslims that were killed were many actually on that day, but still more actually of the kuffar. This is the first day, which is the day of Armath. The second day, which is called the day of Aghwaf. And on that day, that's when the support started coming from Bilad al-Sham. The support of Al-Qaqa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi came, we said there were 6,000 sent, right? 6,000 that were sent to support the army of the Muslims. But just for some of them to move faster, then the leader of the army, basically, he sent a group of 1,000 under the leadership of Al-Qaqa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi. This way, basically move quickly and join the army of the Muslims. And the second day, the fighting started. But the second day, the Persians did not have the elephants because they were busy preparing or repairing basically the boxes and everything that they used to have actually in there. And Al-Qaqa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi came with 1,000, but he came up with a trick. He said that each 10 of you would come once at a time, like the trick that Khalid al-Walid used in Mu'tah, alayhi ridwanullah, that basically 10 of you will come at a time and you shout Allahu Akbar as loud as you could. Now the army of the Persians, all they see is a group of Muslims coming, and then another group is coming, and then another group is coming. 1,000 divided by 10, that's 100 groups. So they thought that 100 battalions basically joined the army of the Muslims. And they were difficult, those Muslims were difficult to deal with as it was. So imagine now with 100 more battalions. So the morale of the Persian basically started going down. And the army of the Muslims were able basically to inflict serious damage actually on the kuffar on that night. Then the third day came, which is the day of Amwas. The day of Amwas, by then 2,000 of the Muslims were already killed, and 10,000 of the Persians were killed. And Al-Qaqa' alayhi ridwanullah did not sleep that whole night. And the second night, the elephants were ready again. So they bring the elephants back to the battle, and of course they started basically inflicting a lot of harm on the Muslims. That's when Sa'd ibn Waqqas alayhi ridwanullah said, to Asim ibn Amr and Al-Qa'qa' ibn Amr al-Tamimi that basically you take care of the white elephant. They had like a white elephant that was almost like leading the other elephants. That most of the other elephants, he noticed that most of the other elephants basically follow whatever the white elephant would do. So he said that you two take care of the white elephant. And he said to two other people named Hammal and Rabil, basically you take care of the gray elephant which was right behind him. And then true enough, they were able basically to stab the elephant in the eyes, both of them actually in the eye. And one of them, they even cut the trunk of it, and then they run crazy, you know, all the way until into the river, and then after that actually all the way till Mada'in, and all the elephants followed them. So with that, the elephants basically were pacified, were removed completely out of the picture. And the fighting actually continued until the middle of the night. It did not stop. Not only that, but it did not stop, but continued actually through the next morning. And it continued beyond that into the last day, which is called the day of Al-Qadisiyah, which is what day now? The fourth day, the day of Al-Qadisiyah, and it continued actually all the way until the middle of that day, by which time the rest of the army coming from Bilad al-Sham had already actually joined them. And the Muslims, with that, they were able to inflict some serious damage. And even one of the Sahaba, one of the soldiers' name is Hilal ibn Alf al-Tamimi, he went after Rustum himself. And he looked and he checked his tent, and Rustum had already actually left his tent. And he followed him, and he found out that he was already actually in the river, running away, and he followed him and he killed him. And with that, the whole army basically was destroyed and fell apart, and the Muslims were able to defeat them, and that basically paved the way into the conquest of the capital of the Persian Empire, which is Al-Mada'in, which was surrendered by the Muslims to the Muslims without actually any fighting, as we will see inshallah next week or next time. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa jazakumullah khair. There's another major event that is coming also next week that probably is bigger and more people are waiting for it, and that is Black Friday. One of the reasons I'm saying that, of course, Black Friday, some people wait for it from year to year, and many wait to buy certain actually essentials, but most of us actually buy certain things that are nice to have but are not essential. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody can say anything wrong, like all the eye gadgets and all the nice things. But subhanAllah, wallahi, I think it will be great if we can take some of that money that we're planning on spending. You can buy something. If you want to buy two things, buy one thing. And wallahi, the rest of the money, I would say donate it. Donate it to some of the Muslims, especially, you know, the hot spots today. Yani what's happening in Gaza, you know, of course what's happening in Syria, and what's happening also in Myanmar, you know, in Burma. Yeah, these are really important causes. And yes, of course, it is nice to have an iPod, but we can live without an iPod. But this money can go a long way. Wallahi, to us, it's just a matter of enjoying certain nice gadget. But for those people, it could be a matter of life and death. And even if we need it, even if we like it, it is something that really matters. Well, there's nothing that we can do. Yeah, we can make a dua. This is great. But like Omar alayhi ridwanullah said, اجعل مع دعاء العجوز شيئا من القطران. That put something tangible with your dua. That's why it is good. This is something that we can do. A little bit, even a little bit of money, wallah, can go a long way over there. I mean, we've all seen these horrifying pictures coming from Gaza. And of course, and you know, I mean, we talk about Syria happening, you know, for the last year and a half, but the constant through all the problems is Palestine. It's always there. It comes on and off at the time, but it's always there. And of course, it's what's happening so quietly and silently in Burma. Nobody even is taking notice of that. That's why, wallahi, our money can go a long way. Subhanallah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised. Allah says in Surah Ali Imran, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You will not achieve this great level of al-birr, of piety, until you spend from that which is dear to you. When you feel like buying this cute, nice iPod, and you start to send the money instead somewhere else. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised the Ansar. You know, we talk about the Ansar and the Sahaba. Well, that's what they did. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيُؤْثِرُونَ عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ وَلَوْ كَانَ بِهِمْ خَصَاصَةً. That they favor others over themselves despite the need that they have. That's why, wallahi, just an encouragement to my brothers. This will remain. This will remain. Whatever we buy, you know, again, I'm not saying it's haram. Absolutely not. But what I'm saying is that this is saved with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is invested with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. خير إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم بحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خيرا.